We're heading back to 1978 for the debut album from a group that virtually defined new wave music. If you looked at the title of the episode, you already know what it is. If not, stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome, friends, to the 3324 podcast. Music and movies galore. Hundreds of episodes, we can say now. Hundreds.
Yeah.
Hundreds.
We can we?
You can
That's
sort through them, and we'll leave it to you to pick and choose which ones you want to check out first. But there's a lot there to go back for. So by all means, after this one, have at it. Right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Do you do that? You listen to podcasts, right? You don't go in order. If when I find a new podcast, I'll scroll through and say, okay, well, what's
No, yeah.
What do I want to check out
looking
first?
For that one, that one episode.
The grabber.
That's right.
It's the one that, oh yeah, I want to see that. I want to listen to that. So,
yep.
Same thing here. Go ahead and check out what we've got to offer, the back catalog, as it were. There's plenty there. And then there's always new stuff every week coming out. So, dare I say, Eric, we're prolific. We're prolific, right? We are.
True. That's a fair statement. Yeah, I think so.
We're prolific podcasters. Stand by that. And we're going to continue our prolificness, if that's a word, this week with an album. Wow. This band actually referred to this album. They said this album could be just our greatest hits.
Yeah.
Because it's one of those that from a debut artist, a lot of things going on with this album from the Cars. So the group is the Cars. The debut album is just called The Cars. And it came out in 1978. So we'll get rolling with the stats. Released in June of 1978, produced by Roy Thomas Baker, who would produce most of their material. There were 3 singles released for this album. Just What I Needed hit number 27. My Best Friend's Girl hit number 35. Good Times Roll hit 41. But there were 4 other songs that were radio hits, FM radio hits.
Yeah,
and these should not sound unfamiliar. You're All I've Got Tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Bye Bye Love, and Moving in Stereo. So you've got another 3 songs that were just kind of the FM staples that you would always hear on the radio. This is kind of like that. This is kind of the best of both worlds. Almost much like Billy Joel, The Stranger.
Yeah.
Right. That was boom, 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 boom. And this is the same thing, but it's from a debut artist, which is even more incredible that this amount. It hit number 18 on the Billboard charts. It spent 139 weeks on the charts. So this was, as Ron Burgundy said, kind of a big deal. It went 6 times. It went 6 times platinum.
Yeah,
that's in excess of 6 million copies. Again, for a debut album in the 70s, this is a lot. That's a lot of copies going out the door. It's a big thing. And the Cars were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2018. And that would actually be the last performance with Rick Ocasek, who was one of the leaders. So while we're there, let's just talk about who is in the Cars. We'll kind of get that done. You've got Rick Ocasek, who's kind of the Cars are kind of a visually striking band because of Rick Ocasek, right, Eric?
Yeah. Unusual looking.
A beanpole of a guy who's very tall, very thin. Mm-hmm. He's got a giant, he doesn't have an Adam's apple. He's got an Adam's pineapple. He's lanky, jet black hair, just a very spidery, right?
Yeah.
A very striking countenance that he had. And he was the main songwriter, not the only one, but the main one. Benjamin Orr on bass, who passed away in 2000, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Then you've got Elliot Easton on guitar, David Robinson on drums, and Greg Hawkes on keyboard. So you got a standard kind of 5-member kind of group. In the 70s, I was kind of thinking about it. I'm like, oh, this is kind of like Styx with the setup of the band.
The setup, not the sound.
Yeah, not the sound. No, most decidedly not the sound, right? But you've got the 2 guitars, the keyboardist, bass player, and drummer. So it's kind of like that five person setup with the keyboard enhancements. So it's a really interesting thing for that. And I was thinking about that. We think about maybe you could tell me when you say the Cars, do you think the 70s or do you think the 80s?
Definitely the 80s.
Right? They have
Yeah.
that feel. They have that.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah. I mean, they were this right out the gate was probably the first true new wave album that I actually heard. I think it was this and
Yep.
Gary Newman
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
his
There's.
song, Cars,
Yep.
ironically. But yeah, it was almost, I mean, in a way, I always thought that, I didn't know back then who was who, so Gary Newman might have been in the Cars,
Yeah.
um, for all intents and purposes, but yeah, but 78 kind of blew my mind. But when I really listened to the album, the one thing that I think of is when I moved to Dobbs Ferry
Uh-huh.
in 78. So this album was huge. So I'm looking at it from a purely nostalgic
Yeah.
point of
It's
view, because Dobbs Ferry is the only place that I see in my head
when you.
when I listen to this album.
Okay.
There's no other place.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so many memories attached to it.
Yeah.
Just
And it's funny. Like I said, they're so thought of in the 80s, because
yeah.
their second to last album, Heartbeat City, was like gigantic. Like
Oh
that was
yeah,
kind of
at
like
that point they
the
were
pinnacle.
like fully in on the MTV
Yeah.
thing. The very visual band.
Produced by your boy Mutt Lang, who you
Yeah, the
it's not.
the production values were much higher.
Yeah, much to their
So
chagrin,
yeah,
they were not like they wanted Mutt Lang, and it's kind of like, be careful what you wish for, you might get it,
yeah,
because he's a
yeah,
perfectionist. They were used to kind of working
yeah.
kind of quickly, and that, well, like with Roy Thomas Baker, it's kind of like, okay, we kind of do this, we get it done.
Right.
But with Mutt Lang on Heartbeat City, he's a perfectionist. Like, you're not singing the vowel correctly. Like, you need to redo like that. That's the type of precise production that he provides, and you hear that with Def Leppard. Everything sounds, as much as you hate that sound,
And it
it sounds
shows. Yeah,
it's a self-contained thing.
right.
This was well before that, but this their debut album still outsold Heartbeat City. That went 4 times platinum, and this went 6.
Yeah.
So it's still an amazing thing. Now you hit on new wave. So the Cars were formed in 1976. Rick Ocasek and Benjamin Orr were kind of in bands before this to get together, so they kind of were the nucleus of the Cars, and then I think Elliot Easton came on, and then they kind of rounded everybody out. So the term new wave, right? I was thinking about it, because when you think of the Cars, that's the only term you could think of. That's the only, like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
you probably could ascribe other things to him, but when you say someone to someone, what is the Cars music? What
Yeah.
genre are they? New wave.
Right.
New wave. Right? And
Yeah.
you
There's
hit on
no.
that with Gary Newman.
They wear that badge very well. I mean, they could be the poster.
That's what I was that's what I was getting at.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Is in 78. That's when this was kind of starting, right? There was, new wave was kind of punk music with the pop sensibilities kind of merged, and
Mhm.
and it was kind of snubbing their noses, this type of music at the progressive rock, and that big, and the corporate rock that, of like that Styx was
That
accused of, that kind of overblown
yeah.
stuff, where it's kind of,
Yeah.
it's really catchy, it's bouncy, and it's very listenable, but it's got those kind of those interesting edges. And in 78, I wanted to pull this up. I think we haven't done this in a while, but talk about some of the albums that were out in 78.
Mhm.
And you'll see that there's kind of there's two things going on here. In 78, you had Some Girls by the Rolling Stones. You had Darkness on the Edge of Town by the Boss, Bruce Springsteen. You had Stranger in Town by Bob Seger, right?
Mm.
You had 52nd Street by Billy Joel. You had Who Are You by The Who. You had Double Vision by Foreigner.
Yeah.
Pieces of Eight
Excuse me.
by
Yeah.
Styx. But Seriously Folks by Joe Walsh, right? So, and Jazz by Queen. So we'll stop there. And Boston, Don't Look Back, their second album.
Mhm.
Then you had This Year's Model by Elvis Costello. Parallel Lines by Blondie.
Blondie, yeah.
More songs about buildings and food by Talking Heads. Question, Are We Not Men? Answer, We Are Devo by Devo in
Yep.
1978.
Wow.
Give 'Em Enough Rope by The Clash. So you see what's happening here. There's some definitive things happening where there's still a the 70s rock, Heaven Tonight by Cheap Trick. So there was that whole Rod Stewart, Blondes Have More Fun. The whole 70s rock thing was still alive and well.
Yeah.
But then there was this other thing happening, especially when you have stuff like Blondie and Devo and Talking Heads, and then
Right.
the Cars.
This whole new, like, well, the term new wave, I guess, could apply here in this year. I mean, some of the, and those were the more preferred albums,
Yeah.
for sure.
Literally a
You
new
know?
wave of music was
Yeah.
happening where,
Yeah.
and I almost looked at it, that Devo and Talking Heads both had albums in 78, and then the Cars' first album was in
Mhm.
78. I kind of look at the Cars as almost like splitting the difference between the weirdness of Devo and the quirkiness of the Talking Heads. And I think the Cars kind of fit, like, are the ones that you could listen to that you kind of, they kind of split the difference between both. Like the Devo stuff was kind of way out there,
They could
very,
be very,
very,
yeah, they were the most accessible.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Right. Very,
absolutely. Yeah.
Devo, very, kind of quirky, electronic, and very avant-garde. And then the Talking Heads were more accessible, but still kind of off-putting, like still not
Right.
off-putting in a bad way, but it was kind of like,
Right.
like you kind
The
of, the music made you work for it. And then the
more
Cars
experimental. Yeah,
were
at
kind
that
of right
point.
there.
Um, you often mention that it takes a couple of albums for somebody to kind of, to put out that one gem
Mhm.
of a record. And boy, that they already did it with this record.
Do you have
I
my
mean,
note? Do you have my notes?
no, I don't. Am I thinking, am I,
You're literally right, right. You're like going from my notes. I wrote one of the things I wrote.
that's hilarious. Yeah.
I wrote that the
Um,
band emerged fully formed, and that
yeah.
no evolution was needed. So you hit the nail right on the head.
No,
There wasn't a run up like Billy Joel, where he was kind of plodding along, and he's like this
that's
piano playing
right.
guy,
Yeah.
and they're ready to drop him, and they're like, get your act together, and then he starts hitting his stride, or these other bands where they kind of have those 3 or 4 albums where they're just kind of figuring things out, and then they have the one.
Right.
This album, there's 9 songs on this album. 6 of them are certified like either chart hits or FM radio staples. That's
Right.
it. Like, again, for like I said, for an album from a debut artist like this,
Mhm.
I didn't even realize it. I was like, all this is on here,
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
and it's like,
Well, it didn't hurt either, too, that they were the darlings of Boston.
yeah,
Apparently, the local radio station in Boston would play the demos
yeah.
of a lot of these songs before they polished them up. So they already got some, I guess, a following.
Yeah, they had some of
Happening
those
because they,
yeah,
there was very favorable reviews.
disc jockeys,
Critics started.
championing them.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So that certainly didn't hurt them out the gate. So yeah, I mean, there's something to the band. I guess it's a testament to them and the songwriting and what they wanted from the get go. It wasn't something that they necessarily led up to and work. It had to. Well, this doesn't work. Let's try this kind of thing. It doesn't feel like
Yeah,
that at all. It
they
feels
weren't
like
like grasping, I think. Yeah, they weren't trying to
that's
like,
right. Yeah.
oh, they're trying to do this and it didn't work, or
Hmm.
their sound was uniquely their own and something totally
Yeah.
the sound of the Cars is the sound of the there's not as poppy as they are, and
Yeah.
they also have this unique combination which is different than you've got we've got the American new wave, and then you've got the British new wave. And I think we said this with the Blondie episode too. Like,
Hmm.
the American new wave music and those artists seem to still embrace the guitar with the keyboard, whereas the British,
Yes.
this is a broad generalization. Elvis Costello, you could say, oh well, it's not true. Broadly speaking, by the time we got to the 80s too, there was, in the British, the new British invasion, there was more of an embracing of the electronics and the technical, the
Yeah.
keyboards, the
The
synths,
synth bands.
all that kind of
Yep.
stuff.
Hmm.
Whereas the Cars kind of there's those rock elements that kind of grab you, say, "Oh wow, this is like a rock song." But then they have those keyboards woven in that
Mhm.
makes it sound like something different. It doesn't sound. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers have virtually the same kind of setup of a band,
Right.
and they have a keyboard player. But
Mhm.
these bands do not sound alike, but they have the same
No.
exact keyboard, the same exact setup. Styx, like I said earlier, has the same exact setup with keyboard, the same amount of members and the same setup, but the bands doesn't mean that they're going to sound alike. They're
Mhm.
approaching it in a different way, and the car and this album is just so dynamic from just as soon as it starts. You
Yeah,
know,
I wonder, like, in during those days when things were changing so rapidly and so, radically, um, and the punk movement kinda sort of, like, really, kinda came and went, and then this new wave stuff started happening. Well, the rawness of that starts to slide away, and now we want to embrace technology and all this stuff. And I wonder if it's regional. I wonder if, like, in the United States, depending on where you're from, who was experimenting more with this stuff, like on the New York scene,
hmm
Boston, like the East Coast kind of sound. Of course, the West Coast was still pretty much stuck in hippie land. There's very sunny, still putting out that very, like, there's
yeah,
a lot of
still
great acoustic
The
music
California sound was still.
still happening at this point. So yeah, I think it'd be interesting to kind of chart that,
Yeah,
to take a
well,
look at that as a
Talking
kind
Heads
of,
were from New York.
yeah,
Right. So
yeah,
we know
hmm,
that, and like you said, these guys were from Boston. Blondie is certainly a New York band as well.
hmm,
If you want to throw Lou Reed into the mix outside of Velvet Underground and what he was kind of doing in the
right,
'70s is squarely certainly New York based. So I would
yeah,
say, but you could probably easily split the country in half and say, from the middle of the country east was probably
hmm,
that grittier new wave sound, because by the time when it got to California, you had stuff like the Motels, which was kind of smoother. The production was a little bit kind of smoother. They still used a lot of those. They still had all those elements of new wave. But
yeah,
like I said, but yeah, there was still there was that California sound influence put on there,
hmm,
like Scandal, like Goodbye to You, like certainly sounds like a West Coast kind of version.
very LA,
Yeah,
very
of a
LA
West Coast
urban.
version
Yep.
of new wave. So yeah, you make a
Hmm.
really good point that yeah, and just I'm sure parts of England and other parts of Europe, it was certainly more regional. I'm
Yeah.
sure like what Falco was doing was very kind of more electronic, right? More programming and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So yeah, there you have those enclaves of whatever the musical scene was in
Yeah.
that area, then new wave kind of adapting from it. So whatever the New York punk scene might have been, that's what you kind of that's the melting pot, and then new wave kind of rises from that. And they throw
Right.
the police are thrown in kind of
Oh, of
in that
course.
conversation as well of taking those punk elements, some progressive
Wanting,
elements, and then putting it
yeah.
in that pop rapper. So they certainly are part of the conversation for new wave as
Yeah,
well.
always, like we've always talked, like I mentioned it several times, of starting out as we want it to be just punk.
Yeah,
And, but that's like, there's only so much you can do when your ambition takes hold and you want to start doing more in the music. Punk rock is like the Ramones and the Sex Pistols. They're playing basically 3-4 chords.
yep.
Every song is pretty much the
And
same thing.
they
It's
made a
it's
career out of it.
it's the attitude. It's
That's
it's
what it
the
is.
it's
Yeah,
the anti, we suck and we know it. The attitude is what is punk rock to me. It's
yeah,
like we don't have to be great musicians, but a lot of these bands had talented people in them, and whatever background they came from. Some of them maybe classically trained, perhaps, or they just off. I mean, like, you look at Rick Ocasek, and he is not your typical lead singer. Like you
yeah.
mentioned, he's very sort of, I would say he's very eccentric.
Yeah,
Just sort of like ironic. He's got that sort of like
it's
cool attitude. Like,
detached, very detached.
yes, yes,
Yeah,
it's just very, very, and it works.
yeah,
It works for this particular,
yeah, and
their
he would
particular
actually,
sound in this band. Yeah,
yeah, he would actually say, because he wrote a lot of the songs and a lot of the hits, he would actually say, if I want a beautiful voice, or this song needs to be sung right, we give it to
yeah,
Ben. We give it to Benjamin.
yeah,
And
because he had the
because
right.
he had those vocal chops, and Rick Ocasek would lean into that quirky stilted, detached vocal style, like because he knew
Yes.
that was what he was good at. So they had you had that you had like someone that can kind of do the straight ahead, kind of more rockier things. But when it got to
Yeah.
the quirky and the strange things,
Right.
like you had someone there that was already that was kind of tailor made visually and vocally for it, and he kind of leaned
Right.
into it. That nervous, that nervous quiver in his voice, and that kind of
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that almost seems like he's an uncomfortable person in his own skin. And the cars,
It
it's
sells
great
it.
tools to have because you can kind of like on this album, you've got the straight
Mhm.
ahead stuff like Good Times Roll, My Best Friend's Girl, just what I needed, Jesus. But then
Mhm.
right after those three, those are the first three songs on the album. Good Times Roll, My Best Friend's Girl, Just What I Needed. But then right after that, you get a song called I'm in Touch with Your World, which is squarely the new wavy stuff. It's that
Yeah.
that kind of strangey stuff that you think of when you think of new wave music.
Yep.
And Rick Ocasek has the lead on it. So um God, it's just that's probably what's so great about this album is
Uh-huh.
six songs that are just bangers. Bye Bye Love is one of my favorite like car
Yeah.
songs of all time.
Yep.
And
Moving in Stereo, of course,
yeah,
was made popular from Fast Times at Ridgemont
yeah,
High.
and that's a new
We
wave
all know the
anthem.
scene.
That's a new wave
We all
anthem.
know the scene. Yeah, and it's not even on the soundtrack. Funnily enough, it's like probably the most remembered scene in the film, and yet it's not on the soundtrack. Like, that blows my mind. So I
You're
don't
not
know.
gonna say you're not gonna say what the scene is for those that have never
Of
seen.
course, well, the Phoebe
Well,
Cates scene
okay,
of course, the pool.
Judge Reinhold.
Judge Reinhold in the
We'll leave it
bathroom,
there.
having his little.
His fantasy scene. We'll leave it at that. Well,
That's right.
that's the best
And
way to
that's the
put it.
thing about this album was, like, in '78, it was great,
Yeah,
and then in '82, it was great even more,
it was. Yeah,
and
it
then
was
it
ahead
would,
of its
like
time.
and then it would reoccur later on in the '80s for me.
Yeah,
I remember our friend Johnny, where we're cruising in the LTD, man. Like, he loved the cars, so he's
yeah.
blasting this record, and yeah, it has that staying power to it, that just can, and you don't.
You don't
I would
realize
argue
it.
that you probably don't even need the rest of their catalog. I don't know. I
Yeah.
mean, that's just me, but I definitely think this is
Well,
the strongest. And
they had their kind of ups and downs. Their follow up
yeah,
was Candio, which did really well. I mean, Candio
hmm
had a lot of hits on it, and then they put out an album called Panorama, which had nothing. It was weird. Had like
hmm
kind of ran dry. It was like there was nothing on there. Because I went through them, kind of listening. I'm like, wow, if this has a lot of the car stuff that I know. What do these other albums have? And then
yeah,
after Panorama was Shake It Up, which kind of brought them back. Shake It Up is squarely an 80s
yeah,
feeling. It's like that's like a Friday
yeah,
night cruising song.
yep,
And then after that, Heartbeat City came out, and then they had one more album after that when they kind of flamed out. But so I think it was seven albums
hmm
that they had. So not a bad discography. And they were able to have a real clunker in the middle with Panorama and actually and dig their way out of it. And then Heartbeat City, like I said, had
yeah.
Magic, Drive,
I love Drive.
Hello Again,
Yeah,
which is a quirky
yeah,
song. So they were really kind of leaning into it. But a lot of bands will have that clunker in the middle, and that usually will sink their career. So it didn't hurt that Elektra. They ended up signing to Elektra Records, who had like the Doors back in the '60s. I think
yeah,
Eagles were on the Elektra subsidiary of Warner's. I'm not sure, but
hmm
a lot of those
hmm
types of bands and Elektra uh, didn't have any new wave groups on their label, and they were kind of like, wow, what's missing from this picture? So the Cars actually had a couple of labels interested in them, and they ended up going with Elektra because they felt like they were going to get the attention that they needed because they were like one of the few, if not the only
yeah.
new
There's too
wave
many
act.
bands on.
Yeah, when you've got when you've got a band, when you've got a label that's scooping them all up,
hmm
some are going to get lost in the shuffle. So they went with Elektra because it was virtually a wasteland. They hadn't really kind of leaned into it yet. So they
Right.
were able to really get that promotion of wow, we're the new wave band on Elektra. So that was kind of a
Arista was the
Arista was
was
the
the
other one. Yep,
Arista
yep,
was the other label, which had many acts,
yeah,
on it. And yeah, I mean, it definitely And again, it's like this would we be talking about this today? Like record, this is such a weird time that a record label could make or break a
Yeah.
band, or make them more popular, because do people know late record labels back in the day? I mean, I guess so. That's the thing. It's like,
I don't know.
if you're a music lover or a critic or DJ, if you know who's doing what, so it's like, oh, that we're on that label, so
yeah. Well,
we got some recognition,
it seemed
like
like
Atlantic, or
it seemed like from a business standpoint that Elektra was actively interested in that as well, saying, "Wow,
yeah,
there's an opportunity that we don't want to miss here, and we have a glaring omission. We don't have any of this type of music. We don't have any of these types of artists. So
yeah.
we need to kind of get
It was
on
a
it, you know."
smart, good call.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
it really was. You know, much
yeah,
like Elektra when they signed the Doors back in the '60s, it was the same thing. I think it was
yeah,
Jack Holzman, I think, or who signed them, and they hadn't seen anything like the Doors. And like, this is very different. We need to kind of get on it, you know. And as a subsidiary of Warner's, you're still kind of under the big umbrella, but you've got that small label, so they were able to give them that attention. So yeah, the Cars absolutely benefited from being being one of the early bands in the new wave scene, but then also having a label, because we've had conversations about that where the label just isn't interested, doesn't promote it like we did Men at Work.
yeah.
You know, CBS USA was not interested in this Australian band, and it took like 3 or 4 asks for them to finally
Hmm.
put it out, right? So if you've got a label that's disinterested, you're kind of sunk, despite your best
Yeah,
efforts. You know that ultimately your fate is in someone else's hands. So this was
right.
a good thing with Elektra that they really kind of embraced it, you know, really kind of gave it a push, and it was very, you know, like I said, the sound is just, you know, I wrote down the Godfathers of new wave, perhaps,
Yeah, that's a fair
you know,
statement.
again, just on this one, 6 million out the door. If you haven't heard this album, I think people take the Cars for granted, almost kind of like Hall and Oates. It's like, oh, you know, they have so many great, you know, Hall
Yeah,
and Oates. Oh, they have so many hits in the eight, you know, you know, kind of that thing.
people are going to go right for the greatest
Yeah,
hits
because that's, you
package.
know, this album pretty much
Yeah,
has it, but it's got a little more on there, and it's good.
yeah,
It's good to listen to for the fact, like you said, that this is a band that kind of came out of the womb like fully formed.
right.
Like this is it. This was their debut. There wasn't any EPs. It was just the demos that they were working up, and then here's the album, and
Yeah,
it's
to have that confidence and that vision that you know exactly what you want and what to do.
yeah, or just to be that good with the material. Like they didn't have to. Yeah.
Well, what I find too is we need to mention Roy Thomas Baker
Yep.
here, who was famous for working with Queen
Yeah. I worked with a lot of
on
artists.
their first five
Yep.
albums. Ironically enough, it, when the backing vocals kick in a lot of these songs, it reminds me of Queen, right?
A little
And
bit.
Queen,
Now that you mention it.
like the game,
Yeah.
right? The game. Now, Roy Thomas Baker did not produce the game, though, which is I find very, very funny. Like it's just, they Queen made that jump and they made it into that new wave type of
Yeah. They
sound.
started working with
Started
Mac.
with Mac, with the
Yeah.
synthesizers and all that. And I just think it's funny that he was already establishing a new wave sound. This guy, and
Yeah.
it's funny that he just didn't continue with Queen to do that. I wonder why.
Yeah,
Like what
that might have been a
was?
Queen decision. Queen might have been looking to say, well, we
Yeah.
need to, you know, we want to change our sound and we're evolving. So he represents, you know,
Mhm.
just like Tom Petty with Jimmy Iovine. It's like, you know, okay, we want to do something different. So we need to, you're nothing against you, but you know, we
Yeah.
need to start using someone different just to change things up, you know.
Right.
And yeah, for all intents and purposes, Queen ended up probably where they might have anyway. But who
Yeah.
knows? Maybe they just needed, you know, they needed some fresh ideas, and it helped. It benefited the Cars, certainly, because yeah, Roy Thomas Baker. Not a lot of people know about him, but formidable producer. Yeah, like you said, he's
Mhm.
no joke. I mean, big stuff in the '70s. You know, uh, like you said, all the Queen stuff. Ian Hunter, Pilot, John Anderson, Joe Lynn Turner. He did Motley Crue in the early '80s. So a
Hmm.
lot of, you know, he worked with Journey on Infinity and Evolution. So yeah,
That's right. Yeah.
so he's kind of, he's kind of like one of those guys in the 70s that you would grab, not a particular style, but able to get the job done. Like I said, not like a Mutt Lang who's got a sound and you can kind of almost pick it out. So yeah, I think it worked. It worked for the Cars. I think having an experienced producer kind of helped with them also. Again, you're talking a debut
Mhm.
album, a brand new group. This guy's worked with Queen. He's already a big kind of a big deal. Kind of like Glyn Johns with the Eagles, right? Same type of thing. It's like
Mhm.
if you get someone to kind of champion your cause and work with you, that's icing
Yeah.
on the cake, right? Because then all you got to do is you
Mhm.
bring your material in, and you've got a professional like this guy that can really shape it and give it, and especially if you're on the new horizon of this new sound, uh, and if
Mhm.
everybody's on the same page, this is what you get. You get a debut album like this is probably one of the greatest debut albums,
Oh, definitely.
right?
And I'm sure at some point we'll probably do a top 5. I could see that on the horizon,
Well, the
debut,
top
like
five
debut
would be
album.
more subjective. It would be what we enjoy. But if you're kind of going pound for pound and you're going chart activity and
Yeah.
all that stuff, this is it. Like I don't think you can't really count Nirvana because they had an album out before. It was on a smaller label, but it wasn't their debut. It was their major label debut, right?
That's right.
This was their debut.
Mhm.
Guns N' Roses. I don't think they. I think that was their. I think Use Your Illusion. I'm sorry. Appetite for Destruction was their debut. I don't think they were on a smaller label. So, yeah, they might have to go into the ring with Appetite for Destruction. That could be a
Well,
tough one, but
Boston.
Boston, say, yeah.
Boston's another one.
Um,
Yep.
yeah, there's a lot of heavy hitters, but these guys are, and these guys are kind of like the dark horse, I think. 'Cause I don't think people realized how many the amount of hits, only because they had songs throughout their career from 78 to what Heartbeat City was like 85, 84 around there, somewhere
Yeah.
around there.
Something like 84,
Um,
85. Yeah.
so it's easy to assume that they're kind of peppered throughout. When not the case, six of those hits
That's
are on
not,
this album.
no. That's
There's
right.
other stuff. I mean, we're kind of shortchanging like their other hits, um, but not really. I mean, it's kind of like um, uh, there there's their greatest. I mean, I didn't bother looking up their greatest hits. I didn't even bother to do that. But like on Candio, right? The hits were "Let's Go,"
Mhm.
"It's All I Can Do," the song "Candio," and "Dangerous Type." So that's like 4.
Mhm.
Panorama had nothing. It had like a song called "Touch and Go," I think, which was like zip. The album "Shake It Up" had
Yeah.
"Since You're Gone" and "Shake It Up," right? And then after that was "Heartbeat
Mhm.
City," which was "Hello Again," "Magic," "Drive," "You Might Think." And then I think "Heartbeat City" was a minor one, and then "Door to Door" was their final one of the '80s before they broke up, which was just the song "You Are the Girl," which was kind of you know.
Yeah.
And then that was it.
And that's when they just started doing solo
Yeah,
projects
that's basically when they
and
broke up. I
whatnot,
think they reformed in 2011, obviously without Benjamin Orr, because he had already passed away, and they did an album after that. So,
Yeah.
squarely a creature of the late '70s and of the '80s. Like I said, probably like we said with Men at Work and some of the other ones, probably better left there. Would
Mhm.
they have? What would a '90s Cars have sounded like? Not sure.
I don't think they would have even.
Not sure.
I don't think they probably wouldn't have even dared to compete with what was happening in the
Yeah.
'90s at
It
that
was
point.
it was tough. It was tough enough in
So
the '80s, and then Rick Ocasek became
yeah.
a label guy anyway. He started working, and he actually started producing music. I think we talked about him in just one of the episodes recently, where he was working with the band, and they didn't want to do a song, and
Mm.
he told them to do it. Oh, it was what was it? Our top 5 alternative. He was producing
Okay.
Buddy Holly for
Yes.
Weezer. Rick Ocasek.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and
Yes.
they didn't. Rivers Cuomo, the writer of Buddy Holly, was like, I don't want to. I don't think it's a good song. Rick Ocasek was like, just record it. record it anyway. You don't have to use it. No harm, no foul. Let's do it. So yeah, he still
Mhm.
continued in the music business. He ended up marrying Paulina Porskova, who's the girl from the Drive video, model,
That's
very
right.
very
Yeah.
famous relationship there.
Yeah.
Um, and then they would divorce. I think they divorced like not long before he passed away, and he didn't leave her anything.
Yeah.
He cut her
Yeah.
out. Not a nice thing to do.
Speaking speaking of which,
Okay.
models, we just talk about the cover of the record.
Yeah, they hated it.
That yeah, they didn't like it,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, I'm not a fan of it myself, to be honest. I just it
It's
is
okay. It kind of
very
set the tone. It was yeah. It kind of like all right, they
yeah
apparently had an album cover already done. I think the keyboardist uh, had kind of made one. He
yeah
said we spent like $80 on it, and it was a collage. And the label's like, we don't want it, and they ended up using a version of it on the inside. On the inside sleeve, they had to take
hmm
some of the images out because it was problematic, I guess. But that kind of set the tone of the car. So it's a woman in a car, and that kind of also set the tone of having having women on the album covers, except for
on the
Panorama.
covers.
So
Hmm.
Candy O is a sketch of a woman, and then uh, Shake It Up obviously has a woman on the front, and Heartbeat City has a woman on it. So that kind of became like
Yeah.
the cars and the women kind of became like their image, although they're not that type of a band, but it just became associated with it for some reason. That was not by
Yeah.
their doing, but it's still an iconic thing now. Like it's kind of like when you think of the Cars, you think of those album covers and they're not sexist. They just have women on
Well,
them.
perhaps they were just promoting the cruising thing, which we did. I mean, we cruised to this music in the
Yeah, at
'80s. I mean,
night,
this was
absolutely.
classic
This is like Friday, and
classic stuff. The kind of
this is Friday,
Friday
Friday
night,
and
rolling the
Saturday night. Yeah,
windows down,
absolutely. Friday and
going down to
Saturday
the
night
waterfront,
albums.
right?
That's it.
Yep.
Cruising around, and if you're not listening to this or stuff like Shake It Up or all that kind of stuff, Let's Go. The
Mhm.
Cars were made for that kind of like nighttime partying, being out, having that kind of music on in the background. We talk about the soundtrack of our lives, and that's kind of where the Cars fit into that. Is they're kind of
Yep.
always there. Like I said, they're always kind of cranking out the hits and the music and staying in step as the 80s progressed and as that music got more kind of electronic and keyboard heavy. They kind of followed suit. Heartbeat City is very kind of synth heavy and really leans into it, and that's why
Mhm.
it did so well, because at that point in the 80s, that's what that music was. So if you listen
Yeah.
to like that
It was
song,
nothing but.
yeah, if you listen to that song Drive, it's like it's all keyboards and synth.
It's all keyboard, the
Yeah,
electronic drums,
it's all
the
programming, it's
whole
all
bit.
sequencing.
I love the song.
Yeah,
I love the mood. I love what it has to say, but yeah, that was they lost that kind of like that guitar edge
yeah.
that this
Well, I
first
think they were
album
leaning
had.
into it. I think
So
that
there was clinging to that, slightly punk sound
it's probably a good thing
or
I didn't.
rock,
I think that was
yeah.
their probably their winning formula coming out of Panorama, which had nothing on it. It's kind of like, okay, we still need
It's a
we can still be
natural
the car. Yeah, we
progression.
can still be the
Yeah.
Cars, and their stuff is uniquely theirs. But when you get to
Hmm.
Heartbeat City, does it resemble this? No. This is very
Mm.
much guitar based first, with keyboards enhancing it. By the time we got to the end of
Yeah.
their career,
And I kind of like that. And I
that's
kind of like
flipped.
the separation there, like I kind of like the way each person is doing their own thing kind of,
Yeah,
it definitely feels more of a band effort. You
yeah,
could argue that something like Heartbeat City might be just three guys. You don't really know
yeah,
because of so much electronic stuff happening. One person could be doing that. You know what I mean? Like, how do you
yeah.
really know
Who's
who's
doing
playing
what?
what?
Yeah,
That kind of.
yeah. You got
That's
you got
right.
a song on this album like Just What I
So,
Needed, which has that balance of the
yeah.
guitar, and then it's got some nice keyboard flourishes. It's got mainly got a keyboard solo in it. So yeah,
Mhm.
that's what the new wave was kind of was adapting the rock music and the punk aesthetics, and these guys. I think the keyboardist here is his name. Is it Greg Hawkes? The Greg Hawkes, yeah.
Greg Hawkes is
Greg
the
Hawkes is the
keyboardist,
keyboardist.
saxophone player.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he said
yeah,
he was notorious for whatever toy came out, they would buy it, even if they used it for a month. Like whatever new
yeah.
technology was coming out. And I was watching one of their live videos on YouTube today, and there's a Fairlight
Hmm.
computer on stage with them, which was, the
Yeah.
Fairlight was cutting edge technology and not easy to use, and they had the Fairlight on stage with them, which is basically a computer screen with early types of sampling. So they said anything that was new, we were all about. We were all about just listen, trying things, even if it was junk. We would just get it and just to check it out, so we can kind of
Yep.
expose ourselves to new sounds, new ways of making sounds. And I think that's what made the Cars unique. Also, is that they weren't uh, so like a horse with blinders on. Of we got to stay this course. They're kind of like, no, let's we're always going to be open to new things, and it was still the Cars, like you said. It's still
Hmm.
in the end still sounded like the Cars, which is a great thing. Should we
Yeah.
should we should we bother
Yeah.
doing favorite songs?
Favorite favorite songs? I don't
The
know.
whole
I mean,
thing,
it's the whole thing.
the whole thing.
Why not? It's a great listen. It's an easy listen. It kind of reminds me of New World Record in that sense, where it's the perfect length.
Hmm.
You just put it on and you just breeze right through it, and it's an enjoyable listen. And for me, like I said, it's very nostalgic. I remember just a very specific time
Yeah,
frame of this album, and those are some of my very favorite times. Those years, 78 to like 82, 83. Like in that stretch right there. Had some really great music,
yeah.
great movies. Um, yeah, I'll always cherish
Yeah,
those
it was
those
exciting.
those
It was
years.
exciting to kind of, you didn't realize it at the time, but when you look back on it now, you're like, wow,
Right.
we were kind of in the middle of one of those musical upturnings. I mean, we were there for a
I
couple
get.
of them, with grunge and everything. But this was,
Yeah, I just.
when you're younger, it just kind of becomes, you're still open to listening to everything. So all this stuff is just coming at you, and you're kind of, and then you realize,
Right.
wow, this was like new wave, and I was kind of listening to that. And, I didn't realize there was all this other stuff going, then like I said, like Blondie and the Police, and you might think
Hmm.
of now, at the time, you probably think of them as separate, like, oh, I like Heart of Glass, or I like this song one way or another. And then, oh, I like, Don't Stand So Close to Me by the Police. But you don't realize that this is actually all like a wellspring of a new genre that's kind of coming from
Yeah.
something specific. But when you're younger, you're just kind of like, they're in different areas. You just kind of like it because it's good music, but not like, oh, this is this genre. It's like, no, it's just, oh, there's this band, The Police. Oh, there's this band, this one, and that. Oh, there's this band, The
And
Cars.
the '80s would do that though. They would
Yeah,
play it to excess, and there would be everybody kind of just there was just so much of it that it kind of canceled the whole thing out. There really wasn't any like by the end of the '80s, it was not a whole hell of a lot going on
yeah,
as
they were
far as
done. It
like
was exhausted. Yeah,
and you had a lot of R&B groups now
yeah.
using electronic equipment, right? Like, the sort of one hit wonders of the, Whitney
Co-
Houston on the scene and the pop
color me
artists, like,
bad.
yeah, so there wasn't, like that late '80s lull there was
Yeah,
just not for me. I guess that's probably why, maybe that's what I'm thinking of when I'm like, when I tend to be critical
yeah,
of the '80s at large. I'm probably not being fair because we're here we are and we're just sort of reminiscing about the early stuff, and it's great. It's
yeah.
great stuff, and
Yeah,
that's
I think
I get this like warm feeling when I listen to this stuff, and that not there aren't a lot of years that do that. Like when you getting older, there's some great albums for sure. Those are easy to just sort of cherry picking off the tree what some of the great stuff was like when you're adult, that kind of thing. But back in those days, it was just I just enjoyed
yeah.
the entire.
I think you
uh,
can. I think you could almost
time.
use the Cars as an example of that, right? Is, you said by the end of the
Yeah,
'80s, you got tired because that style of
yeah,
music had hit a critical mass. Like you said, all everybody was doing it, and the Cars were kind of the evolution. By the time they got to Heartbeat City and their last album, it was the same type of thing. Like I think they had probably
hmm,
taken that idea of the Cars as far as it was going to go. Like they had exhausted. There really wasn't any other pivoting they were going to do because because they were so popular in the 80s and kind of continued to evolve with it, they weren't going to
Mhm.
evolve into grunge. It was never going to happen. They weren't going to evolve into hair metal. So they kind of rode the train to the destination, just like at the end of the 80s, where, all those those bands, just most of them didn't survive because it was just kind of the excess, the
Yeah.
excess, the excess. Let's kind of keep developing this sound. And then no one wanted to hear that sound anymore. And then
Right.
that's why what
Yep.
happened in the 90s happened in the 90s, because people just like, I can't take the shoulder pads, I can't take the Cavaricci suits, I get you like all that, like all that stuff kind of like
Right.
literally got
Yeah.
wiped clean in the by the early 90s. All that stuff was kind of wiped clean and done, and it didn't even like hold, it wasn't even a holdover. It was like that stuff, the fashions, the type of music, all that
Yeah.
stuff was gone.
The
Yeah,
colors.
it was just gone.
Yep.
It was there. Everybody wore
Even
it to
MTV
excess.
was not the same.
Yeah. Yeah, because then
Which
they
MTV, I kind of, you could argue. I mean, you could blame MTV in a way, for just
it's their fault.
well, the visual, like, people were like leaning into the visual
Yeah,
aspect
the
of the
more
music, and
splashy or the
a
more
lot of bands,
the more brighter the better.
the
Yeah.
bands were right, and that was a big hook.
Yeah.
Um, but like by the time you got to the '90s, MTV kind of lost that
Well, they were
sort of
leaning into the grunge
pulse.
too, and they were leaning into the alternative thing, and they were leaning
Right.
into that, the baggy, the cargo pants and the flannels. They were
Yeah.
kind of spearheading those changes as they were following them, and pushing them forward, and kind of getting it out there. So, um,
Uh,
yeah, the Cars. Absolutely check it. This album's out on Spotify. I didn't see any special editions, but even if there was, I don't want one. Um,
there is a Rhino
yeah,
edition.
I just
Apparently,
need these nine
it's a
songs.
brand new remix.
Yeah,
Yeah.
who needs it? You want
Yeah.
the
Right.
original, get the, this is one of those ones. Advocate for, like, this is the original intent of the band. These 9 songs was what their statement was. Anything outside of that was okay. Not part of what this magical thing that happened in 1978 was. And we didn't even mention Out of the Blue in 1978. See, I haven't had the bell in a long time.
What came out? Yeah, but that came out in
77.
77.
That's why. But it was still
The
charting.
end of
It was
77.
still charting.
To
Yeah,
be fair, but it was
it was still charting.
yeah, right. There you go.
It was still charting and still going strong. But again, those were like the last gasps of that whole type of genre of music. So,
Yeah.
listen to this one. That's all we're going to say. Much like Men at Work, I think this is another debut, and it's interesting that we've done 2 music episodes in a row, or close to each other, that are debuts, and both fantastic debuts.
Yeah.
Both virtually unknown bands, both with a treasure trove of music in it. And then both of this one though is 6 out of 9. You're not going to get better than that. This is an easy listen.
Yeah.
Like I said, the first 3 out of the gate, it's like you're ready. We put this on a Friday or Saturday night, you're done. Get in your car, put this on, and drive around.
If you know it and know it well, you know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Right. But if you don't know it,
if you don't, this is an opportunity to check out, like the seedlings of what new wave and what would come in the 80s. This is kind of this album and Parallel Lines are kind of like the seedlings of that thing. We'll probably get to a Talking Heads album as well, which would be the same type of thing. But yeah, anything in closing about the Cars? I think can we shut the door? Can we shut the trunk?
I think we have.
Shut the trunk on the Cars.
The trunk of the LTD. The gold LTD.
That's it. Champagne colored.
Yep.
Champagne
color,
which is different than gold. Champagne is a little different hue, but nevertheless, I think that's going to do it for this episode of the 3324 podcast. We've advocated for this album. It's the first album by the Cars. It's just called The Cars. So just check it out. The beginnings, the ending of one era in the 70s, but the beginning of another. And this band, these 5 gentlemen, were at the crossroads of it. Taking those elements of rock and roll and then adding something that was new on the horizon and kind of bringing it with them into the 80s. So that's going to do it. Check us out on social media, won't you? Go check out us on Instagram and Facebook. A lot of fun there. A lot of people hitting us up, posting
Mhm.
stuff, a lot of great conversations. If you want the video version of this, go to YouTube. You can like and subscribe there. We pretty much put out the new episodes. We've got a whole bunch of other stuff, and we've got episodes we never even uploaded. So we've got old stuff that we could even go back to also and put that up. So I'll start doing that as well. So for Eric, this has been Dean. We will catch you on the flip side. Boom. Whoops. It's not stopping. It's not stopping. Failed to stop recording. If the problem is refresh the page, then try stopping the recording. Lost connection to the server, attempting to reconnect. All right, I'm going to refresh it. Don't leave.